Welcome to Dirt, the straight talking construction podcast with me, Mike Wharton.
And me, Angela Mansell. Today we're going to be talking about contracts, legal, and how to generally cover your arse.
And let's talk about something that is not talked about enough, contracts and legal.
I sigh because it is kind of deathly boring, and you can see out there in the world, can't you, that people find it deathly boring, and maybe that's why we end up with so many problems, but I'm sure we'll get onto that.
And why do so many subcontractors sign contracts that they don't understand?
I think there's a few other bits to that if I really think about it. I'm not sure, whether they signed anything, because I'm not even sure sometimes that contracts even really exchange hands. Certainly at the end of the food chain on sort of smaller stuff, I'm just thinking about some of the examples that I am aware of, sort of tail end packages. Got some experience in a different life, in a different world, say like in a cleaning package. Rarely see a full order in something like that. And even when you do see an order, probably halfway through the job when their contract lands. I think there's some issues around whether people even see them before they start.
Do they treat it as a secondary thing apart from winning the work and everyone applauds and yeah, let's go?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what goes on. I think, winning the job is getting given a start date and attending a pre-start meeting. I think that's kind of the bigger issue, really, isn't it? But why do people not read them? They don't understand them. They don't really understand the mechanics of like the contracts and the contract suites. They haven't got the skill set maybe to kind of do that. I think there's plenty of businesses, even of decent sizes, that probably fall into that kind of category. It's almost like they're a necessary evil. And even if I do, I think there's maybe an attitude that even if I do read it and I don't agree with some of it, what am I going to do about it?
But therein lies the problem, isn't it? We look at all the number of contractors going out of business, being busy that we've spoken about before, and yet ending up out of business, particularly with payment issues. You see on social media lots of moaning about I'm not getting paid and la, but yet a specialist can very easily enable that problem, can't they, by simply not understanding the contract?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the specialism, probably, for being dead honest, even within our business. We've got some of that specialism in our business. We've got qualified sort of QSs, people who know the way around a contract. But there are times where it's even good in our experience to get a third-party set of eyes to have a look at it and just, kind of double check what you're thinking. And again, I think there's probably a perception out there, like I was alluding to before. I'm not really sure that people realise, contracts are negotiable. There isn't an obligation to sign it as you're presented with it. If there's stuff in there that you went to a pre-start meeting and you didn't agree those payment terms, you hear about that a lot, don't you? The contract really is a set of rules that we're all supposed to play by. Ultimately, we're all in a contracting business, aren't we? I think people sometimes kind of forget that bit, even main contractors and further up the chain. So they're the set of rules that we're all supposed to play by. But then even when we do read and sign them an agreement, there is that mistrust of them because people don't often play by them, do they?
But the specialists so often think that they can't negotiate, that if they try to negotiate, the client will simply go elsewhere and award the packages to a competitor. And we both know that that's just not the case, right? Because the contractor needs us just as much as we need them, right?
Yeah. And again, there's probably part of that where maybe people are afraid to have the conversations up front around high level, before you even get into a job. What are your contract terms? Potentially that should be part of your qualification process. That should be part of your decision-making process as to whether you want the job or not. Because if someone, I think one of the biggest things that people realise that kind of sit in contracts and that affects them is payment terms. That's kind of one of the biggies for me. And if people are trying to push you out to, 60, 65, 90-day payments, you really need to understand what that means and sort of understand when you're going to get your first payment, how much work are you going to do and when you're going to first get paid. And
how your cash flow is going to be affected, ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, the other nasty that often sits in contracts will be around retention. You know, I don't want to go off on a tangent. I think we need to kind of hold the conversation around contracts and whatever. But yeah, retention. You're signing away your profit in a contract if you're not careful. You need to be really clear about how much they're taking, when they're going to pay it you back, what's the mechanics for getting paid it back. You know, that's one of the things you see quite a lot of, and that's what will cause you issues down the line.
Yeah, retention's a funny one, isn't it? We know why it's there. Lots of specialists complain about it. But if the quality's not there on the job, it's absolutely justified, I think. You know, we can't complain that it's there if we as a specialist sector are not delivering to the appropriate quality. Because then the main contractor, you know, simply wants to ensure that we're going to come back, right?
I'm not sure on some of these numbers, though, whether that is really what it's giving the contractor. I mean, basically, the contractor's trading your profit.
Well, that's us using, yeah, that's them using us as a bank.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all know that.
But again, I'm not sure sort of, you know, 1.5% or 2.5% down the line, you know, if there was a substantial defect, is that really enough to kind of call you back? So I'm a bit more sceptical about retentions. I think, you know, you don't go into Wren Kitchens or, you know, your bespoke kitchen supplier down the road or the order a kitchen and you hold retention on them as a householder. You know, they have a process by which you go through if you've got any complaints or you've got any issues.
What's the answer then for a small specialist contractor when, you know, when a great big contract lands and it says something like this is back to back with the main contract, but we're not sending you the main contract. You can come and look at it in our office on a Tuesday when there's a full moon at 2:00 in the morning, but you can't take it away with you. What do you suggest?
I think it is that piece is, you know, if you're a smaller business and you are looking to grow and you want to get involved in kind of to grow, you need to take on bigger work. There's nothing wrong with holding your hands up and admitting that, you know, it's not your bag, you don't know. But you need to find somebody who does. Yeah, it's going to cost you some money, but it might be the best money you ever spent to protect yourself up front. So I think there's this piece around getting some help and admitting and understanding what it is you need to do. So there are consultants out there. There are places to go and get this advice. No different than most people will probably be used to maybe getting some health and safety advice, you know, to operate on some of these sites, external health and safety advice. It's exactly the same principle commercially. But, you know, just don't sign anything. Just make sure you understand what you're getting into before you get into it. Just following on from some of the conversations we've just had, what's your take on contracts? Do you think they are there to protect both sides?
No, absolutely not. I think we both understand that contracts are not there to do that. You know, the problem with general contracts ultimately is that when a client awards a main contractor a job, the client's gone to their lawyers saying, we want to protect ourselves against every eventuality because it's construction and perhaps they don't understand it if they're not regular buyers of construction. So their lawyers will then come back with a whole bunch of clauses. And because the main contractor wants the job and won't negotiate because they'll be in a competition, they will simply accept it. And then they will take that main contract and they will cascade it all the way down the chain, regardless of the size of the packages. If the main contract is 25 million, the packages could be as small as 100,000, 500,000, etc. It's just not appropriate to expect that specialist to take on board the same risk level as a main contractor's taking on the £25 million contract. So that's where issues come. For example, we just walked away from a 7-figure job for those reasons, where there was an attempt to cascade the whole of the main contract down to us, which most of it just doesn't apply to us. So why would we agree to actually accept that level of liability? And when it was pointed out by our QSs to the client that was the case, it was a case of, well, it won't affect you, so we'll just leave it in. And our position was, no, it won't affect us, so you'll take it out. And they said, no, we can't do that. Well, why not? I mean, it's absolute nonsense. Even down to things like surveys and reports, where the client at the top of the tree is potentially saying to the main contractor, you need to rely on your own stuff, don't rely on us. They're then cascading that too. Well, if they provide us a report on groundworks or steelworks or what have you, we've got to rely on that. We can't not rely on it, because we may as well just do the report ourselves.
Well, let's be the main contractor.
Yeah. If we're the principal, then we'll accept that risk, but we'll discuss that with the client. And when we are principal, with an end user particularly, we talk about their risk, we talk about our risk, we talk about weather risk, delay risk, steel, labour risk, whatever the risk may be, we talk about it. You've got to, because if you don't, you're potentially signing up to something that either can't be delivered, which was the case with this one that we walked away from. And despite us pointing out, guys, you are facing significant financial risk because this cannot be delivered the way you want it to be delivered. The answer was, we'll sign it or we'll find somebody else. And our answer was, find somebody else.
The thing that's occurred to me though is that I think this whole contractual position it's symptomatic of the way that our world goes about procuring, because every job stands on its own, every client stands on its own, and there will be, we're supposed to have a standard set of contracts largely in this industry. We're supposed to have a suite of JCT contracts and we're supposed to have a suite of NEC contracts. They've already been negotiated and the principles are set out, isn't that right? That is what's supposed to happen.
Over many years and research and expertise, yeah.
Yeah, what we do every time is we reinvent the wheel, don't we? And we go back to the start on one project and we amend them. What's the point in having a standard set of documents for contracts that then get amended? Call me cynical, but, I take a look at some of this and it's lawyers drawing up these contracts, and there's lawyers involved in every property and construction deal. And the cynic in me says somebody's making money out of this somewhere. So setting aside the piece about, they're written for the top of the tree. They are designed to protect the client. Ultimately, that's what they're about. But there must be a smarter way to do this, and if we didn't just procure one job at a time, if we were properly sort of working in partnership, clients with contractors with their supply chain, I'd like to think you might see a bit more kind of sensibility around contracts, but I think we're a long way off it. The biggest one I've seen is LADs, is damages, the damages clauses, and you see the main damages coming down through the supply chain. And they have, you might be on £1 million package. I've seen this in our business, £1 million package, and you've got LADs of 200 grand a week, and they just don't align with the value and the risk of your package at all. And you'd have to sign that, wouldn't you?
The issue of amended JCTs is a big one. We've seen them where a standard JCT will land and it's got 100 pages of amends on top of it, which, the more savvy main contractors, commercial directors at main contractors will be far more pragmatic, and they'll talk to the client and say, look, the risk in this project lies in these particular areas, like groundworks is a classic example. So let's figure out a way to mitigate that risk collectively. We'll accept some risk of this, but not that. You're the property owner. You have to accept that you face risk here. Let's collectively try to minimize that. But we also have to take the pragmatic approach with the supply chain, because if you go for 200 grand LADs a week on £1 million package, they're just simply not going to sign up to that. And if they do, and there's an issue, that company's going to go bust, more than likely.
Again, it kind of takes us off onto a slightly different tangent, but I'm immediately thinking that's part of the problem, because what we seem to do, and I say we as a collective in the kind of construction sector, what worries me is there will be someone somewhere who will take on that £1 million job and who will sign a contract with 200 grand worth of LADs in it. Further up the chain know that, and sometimes I think they are looking for that naivety.
The fall guy,
and that's exactly what they want. And there is this piece where I think main contractors take the risk and they think to themselves, oh, well, if they go bust, we'll pick up the pieces and we've got enough in the pot because of what we've saved on the job in the first place. And
it's
an
overcomplicated industry, isn't it? Let's face it, it's far too complicated. It's a reason why government doesn't like to step into construction, because they don't really understand it. And when we look at all the different variables that start from the design point of a project, cascading all the way down, a project can be in design for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It can then be in planning for a couple of years, and then we get 2 weeks to price it.
Well, you're taking me off actually on a thought that I had at the back end of last week. That's all arse upwards, isn't it? Actually, the people who build it and will tell you how much it's going to cost get brought in at the end when all of this work and a lot of the decisions have already been made. And it's top down, and this really should be bottom up. And we've spawned a whole industry around cost consultants, like the amount of times I hear people saying, well, the cost consultants have got it wrong. Well, no shit, Sherlock, because I'm not convinced they really know how much it does cost to build anything. And there's a whole industry that survives around cost consultancy. And what baffles me is if you want to know how much something costs, why don't you just go and ask the people who build it? Because they'll tell you. You might not like the number, but what you'll get is a reality on, if you're going to build that building, that's how much it's going to cost you. And I just don't understand why we're doing what we're doing. So, there was actually something that came up last week. I don't want to mention sort of too many specifics, but it was to do with...
Go on. Mention the specifics.
Well, town centre regeneration, and there's a development partner with the local authority. They have designed the initial scheme. They need this initial scheme, phase 1 of 6. They need that to go to prove the concept that it's doable in this town. So they've gone sort of through the design process, they've gone through all the engineering, it's gone into planning, it's had planning approved. They've sent it out to a contracting base, contractors are pricing it, and people are struggling to get to the number. There's this viability issue. And this notion that competitive tender is going to fix that viability piece baffles me.
That's arse about face.
It is, absolutely. And I'm looking at it going, why didn't you just bring a contractor in early? Push the consultant team to design something that was buildable, that tied in with the budget that you've got based upon the values and the funding you can get. Because in this game, the pie's only so big that the pie to develop and build a site, it is what it is. It's ultimately what that building's worth when you finished it. And then who gets a portion of that pie then deems or dictates whether it happens or not. And we're just getting it all wrong, but it just feels like it's so complicated. I feel like as specialists, we sit down right at the bottom of the chain, we look up, and I look up, and the more I'm pushing on doors and asking questions, like every event I go to, there'll be lawyers there, interesting that we're having this conversation. There's always lawyers in the room. Initially, I couldn't get my head around that. Now I completely and utterly understand why, because a portion of that pie is going on legal fees, clearly, isn't it? But it's backwards.
And disputes.
Yeah.
The inevitable disputes.
Yeah. But, sort of that build cost piece, just partner up with a contractor who specialises in what it is you're trying to deliver and trust them and ask the question.
And where's the budget come from? Because we'll price things and the client will come back and say, oh, it's over budget. We're not throwing ridiculous numbers at this for fun. We're pricing it at the cost it takes to deliver the work, labour, materials, the dreaded word profit, all those things are in there. And then when the client comes back and says it's over budget, well, where did your budget come from?
Well,
come to us first and we'll give you some budget figures based on your meterage. Let's start there. And if you say we can't afford that till next year, fine. Let's figure it out to really help you to make it work for next year.
Well, I am on sort of new build stuff. I got oversight of a development appraisal on how a developer appraises a site and looks at viability. And construction costs on this spreadsheet, I nearly fell off my chair. Construction costs on this spreadsheet was one cell on an Excel spreadsheet, was one cell of a
risk,
cost, cost per metre that a PQS had given them.
Great.
So, and therein lies the problem within this industry, is when construction is confined to one cell on a spreadsheet. No wonder we're in this mess.
So, Ange, in your career thus far, what do you think is the biggest single legal trap that you may have either fallen into or suffered from?
I suppose if I'm being really honest, I can't really tell you any specific legals where it's been related to a contract and it was that clause that got us. Because if I'm dead honest with you, in my position and in the job I do within our business, I'm a bit removed from it. I'm relying on other people in our business to cover off some of that stuff. We, set the principles with the commercial guys and with the operational guys around what we're prepared to accept and what we're not prepared to accept. And then away we go. So, you know, maybe I fall into that category in a way where maybe I am a little bit personally maybe I am a little bit commercially naive. Maybe, you know, maybe I could be a bit closer. I should be a bit closer, because I can't directly answer that question and go, oh, it was that job and it was then. But then the other thing I can tell you was that during the pandemic, you know, we try and avoid like that conflict piece. We try and avoid getting tied up in wasting your time and energy, you know, on legal conflicts. But during the pandemic, we ended up in adjudication with a tier 1 main contractor, and it was pretty obvious they were trying to send us bust. We went to adjudication on Zoom because of what was going on for a payment that amounted to £750,000. And we were right and they were wrong, and we won it. But I felt like they were playing the game to withhold the payment and dragging it, because without that cash, you know, if that decision had gone the other way, you know, it was on a knife edge, and I'm not sure I'd be sat here now, if I'm being really honest with you. So what that stemmed from was about program and acceleration, and, you know, sort of what you'd signed up to in terms of program. Program always seems to bite us on the arse. Sort of as we come into jobs sort of towards the end. So sort of on one part of what we do on the finishing trades, and that's what this relates to. They're running out of time because they're always late, and they're running out of money. So, you know, those packages are the ones that always get squeezed. I don't know whether you experience that, maybe with roofing as well. But I think kind of the biggest legal experience I had was that, and it was proper squeaky bum time, but I knew that we were in the right and we won it. We haven't adjudicated since. I have no intention of ever putting ourselves in that position again. So, you know, from a kind of legal point of view, I'm relying on our commercial guys to kind of know where the boundaries are. And if we're not sure, we go outside and ask. Yeah. What about you?
Probably record keeping. I think it plagues the industry, doesn't it? Lack of strong record keeping. You know, when you're trying to do a great job for a great client and you get to the end of that job and you're putting in claims for various different variations, and suddenly there's a big pushback, and you think, well, hold on a minute, you know, we've done an extra 200 grand worth of work here, and you're essentially saying you're not going to pay us. Why the hell not? You know, you can see the emails, you can see this. But Fred's no longer with the business, and Fred said this, and Charlie said that, and Jane said the other. So I think, you know, the crystal clear thing, generally speaking, in construction is you live and die on your record keeping, particularly when it comes to variations. And, you know, you alluded to program. That's another thing. We constantly have issues where we get delayed by other trades, or if steel work is late, or if there's an issue with steel work, and if there's a main contractor involved, they're not going to move the program. So suddenly our agreed, say, 15-week program is compressed into 9 or 10, which gives...
Not 5.
Yeah, which gives that too, yeah, which gives incredible pressure. And then when we don't deliver, because we physically can't, even though we've put this down, you know, in writing and had the discussions, all guns and tanks point towards us. And we have to try to second guess that situation and mitigate it beforehand, because we don't want to let anybody down. We don't want to be difficult. You know, we want to deliver. I think that's a misnomer, I think, in the market, that especially subcontractors can be really difficult. Well, you know, no one comes to work wanting to do a shit job, do they? We want to do a fantastic job for the client and then do the next job and the next and the next. So we're often plagued by that.
Well, it's funny, actually, because I've immediately thought, I've got a bit of chatter in my head. So you talk about record keeping. When you do it well, you then get accused of, oh, you're lining this up for a claim. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You're contractual.
You're really contractual. Hold on a minute. We're not contractual. We're just...
We've got a contract that we've signed and we're just doing what it says because they're the rules of the game. So, you know, you can't pick and choose when you apply the contract. Maybe you can with payment, but that's a different episode, I think. But I think... Yeah, I get completely what you're saying. I think the biggest challenge there, though, comes out of, you do feel like you get strung along, don't you? Like you've got people telling you to get on and do things, do the extras, do it. and you kind of trusting that you've got a contract that allows for you to get paid for that change. And then how many times do you get dragged to the end and they want to do a deal on the variation account?
It's the same thing in the contract. Again, part of this one that we just declined was there was a mechanism in the contract which essentially said, if you don't follow this mechanism, you will not get paid for variations. But the problem is, in that case, the main contractor was the mechanism. And it essentially said, if they don't follow the mechanism, we don't get paid. Well, that's just setting us up to fail instantly. So that was a big stumbling block as well. Why would we agree to essentially you saying, we don't fancy paying you for that, even though it's all agreed? Our contracts managers are understanding instruction. If a site agent asks them for a variation, they say, absolutely fine. Please send me an email with the request. I'll pass it to our commercial team. They will price it and write back to you. And you in turn will then okay it or otherwise. Yeah. And then, and only then, will we do the work. It's as simple as that. Because if it's a case of, can you just? No, absolutely not. Put it in writing. We'll go from there.
Again, sort of just thinking about that, I don't know if you track, I don't know whether you've got any kind of information and data on, I mean, I haven't, but I'm just sort of thinking aloud in terms of like variation accounts and where they'll often sit as a proportion of a job.
We do, yeah.
These numbers can be really big, can't they? And so part of me's going, all we end up doing, we do this all the time in this industry, is we're dealing with the symptom, not the root cause. Because when you look at what those variations really are, that's about piss poor change management. That's about having too many changes because when you started building the building, it wasn't really designed and nobody really properly knew what they were doing. And tightening up your initial scope and us all turning up and knowing what we were building in the first place would help a lot of that. I'd like to see a place where we get to where, variations should be really, really minimal, or else something's completely and fundamentally wrong in it.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you rightly say, Ange, in construction, we're tackling the symptoms. We're not dealing with the root cause of the disease. That's the issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about labour, Ange. There's a big thing in the market at the moment where there's a lot of talk about quality of labour not being there. What's your answer to that, do you think?
I think you need to start with the fundamentals and the basics, and that is that the pool is shrinking, like the number of people that we've actually got.
Because of age and retirement.
Because of age and retirement, and whether people like it or not, because of Brexit, because there was a lot of Eastern European labour that was sat in construction and it has gone home. We've put ourselves as a country in a place where we've not made it easy, for people to be home. And it's not really that welcoming anymore, is it? So I think, but if we just kind of link it back to kind of the contractual piece and change in construction and variations, I think some of this is linked with not just quality, because set that aside, I think that the labour that we've got in the pool, it's time served, it's aging, invariably, those mainly guys, know what they're doing. They turn up to do an honest day's work and they do know what they're doing. I think part of the problem is we don't make it easy for anyone on site anymore, because what we set out to build is never what we end up building because of all of the change and all of that. And we spend so much time managing that change on the back foot, managing the time and the programme on the back foot. I don't think we're enhancing productivity and really giving people the opportunity to show what they can do, because ultimately they turn up to do a job. Most of them are paid on price and want to be productive and get as much up on the walls or up on the roof as they can. We don't make it easy every day for them. So, I would kind of push back a little bit on this notion that, I think the intimation with that question, not intimating from you, but this notion that, the labour's shit. I'm not sure it is. I think we could collectively do a better job with what we've got.
Yeah, we don't make it easy. You're absolutely right. And quality inevitably suffers then, because either lads are held up on site and they're standing around doing nothing because something's not ready when we've been told that it is ready for them. So there's a frustration from them. And then that also goes forward and I don't think it's a subject for today, but it goes forward into the mental health element of travel, of essentially feeling ignored. We're desperately trying to resolve the site issue, and then there are guys there twiddling their thumbs thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? No one's talking to me. No one's telling me anything. Of course I'm going to bill for day works because I'm here and I've just traveled 100 miles, but I can't actually do my fucking job.
Yeah. I think the other piece, though, to this is that I don't think we help ourselves as an industry, because I'm not sure that the employment model of largely subcontract labour really is the way forward, and it's the most kind of tenable. I think, again, looking at symptoms.
There's Pandora's box, though, right there.
Yeah.
Opening the top of Pandora's box about PAYE versus subby.
Yeah. But again, I think it's a conversation that the industry needs to be really honest and understand that conversation needs having, because the new influx of skills that we're going to need, we bring apprentices and trainees into the industry. To be an apprentice, you've got to be directly employed. And as soon as we train people up, we then flip them out onto subcontract terms and then wonder why they kind of move around the world, and, companies are investing to basically train the world. And I think, that model, I think it's broken. I think we've just got to be honest about kind of where that sits moving forward.
But then if we look at 2025, certainly the first half, with so many projects in delay and, put back, if all those operatives were PAYE people, you'd see firms making redundancies and letting guys go.
Yeah. And again, as with most of the stuff in our industry, it's interconnected with the bigger picture and the bigger piece around pipeline and understanding, kind of where you're going as a business, instead of having maybe 6 months look ahead if you're lucky, which is where we often sit. You need to be kind of further out than that to be able to plan your labour and understand what that looks like. But yeah, I think still think there are some kind of structural pieces to this. I think there's a place for both. I don't think you can have a fully sort of PAYE model, but I think we need a bigger core should be able to sustain a bigger core of directly employed. But then you've got the on-cost, you've got a government that's whacking on stupid levels of NI and on-cost, and while some of the changes that are coming down the track with, day one rights and what, some of that's been delayed and staged, the cost of that, yeah, I get it. It's a cost base. But if you really want a core of really, really well-managed, well-trained people for the future, I do think direct employment has to be a conversation that we all really need to have.
Down to money, though, isn't it, Ange? Ultimately, there's more cost involved, as you've alluded to. Government, and particularly the Treasury, wants more tax. They don't want IR35 issues. They don't want people sort of in the grey economy. But lots of the guys want to be on that tax model of a subcontractor model for obvious reasons. They simply earn more money. So for government to then say, well, we want everybody to be PAYE, well, that's great. But when we're facing NI increases, retention, projects in delay, how are we supposed to pay for these people?
But is it down to the government? It's not really about the government saying that that's what they want. To me, it feels like...
They are, though. The government is saying, we want
They've
PAYE.
said it for years, though, haven't they? They'd have to be big and brave to come. They've still...
Oh, they can't legislate for it.
They're going to have to be brave to come after subbies in construction. Yeah. But I feel like there is an opportunity in this sort of skills shortage that we've got. There is an opportunity of the new people funneling in. That might be where your opportunity to kind of up your PAYE base comes from. But yeah, I think we have to be really honest, and I'm not sure we've got a quality issue. I think what we've got in construction, people talk about productivity and efficiency more than anything else.
Management issues too. Let's face it, we've got a management issue. You've got the blurring between the job titles of site agent, site manager, contracts manager,
site supervisor.
Yeah, that too. When actually, these things should be, more carefully defined, because what one firm calls a contracts manager is someone sitting on a site checking site work. They're not actually managing the contract. They don't have sight of the money. They're not dealing with the labour, with the purchasing department back in the office. They're just on site. So that all goes part and parcel with it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I probably pull it back and, from where I'm sat in the chain, and respectful of the labour pool that we've got. I don't think we make it easy for them to show what they're capable of.
Agreed. Yeah.
So I actually would be turning and looking back up the chain and actually saying, I think we've got a quality issue around the management of projects and the management of contracts. And for me, that then has to go further up the chain and sits with the main contractor. For me, is I think there's a piece where some of them need to get better.
It goes all the way back to the point that it's people that deliver construction. It's people that build buildings. It's not contracts. It's not lawyers. It's not esoteric elements. It's the actual people themselves. So we just turned down another job, and I'll say what it is. It's Natural History Museum, where we actually declined to price it, where that job has been in planning for a year to do a really sensitive job in a very sensitive area of that museum. And we were given 4 weeks to price it, which includes M&E analysis, M&E checking, potentially the recommissioning of it in the job, all sorts of interesting and difficult health and safety elements. And yet we got 4 weeks to price the job, and the job's been in planning for over a year. So the people that deliver that job, the actual people on the ground and on the roof, are disadvantaged right from the get-go.
Yeah. I actually think, we always focus on, just picking up on that people point, we focus on the quality of the labour. It's like the fair hands of men that are building these buildings. They're the source of all the problems. But, I've often thought to myself, if you take one project, say just a medium-sized project, 20 million quid, something like that, how many people are involved in actually delivering that project? If you go all the way back to the top to the client, if you go to all the consultants that are involved from the beginning, and then you filter it down through construction, through main contractors, and then all of their specialist supply chain, in one project, you're into hundreds of people. And yet we're really quick to focus on the tradespeople that sit on site, and they're a really important bit, because without them it don't get built, and that's what I think we forget. But all of those other people, what about the quality of them? This has to sit with the whole chain and the quality of the whole chain. So, what if the architect isn't very good? What if, the pre-con team in the main contractor, I think we're really quick to sort of blame the lads on site. And I think it sits, I think it runs deeper than.
We see it often with the architect. Yes, I'm having a pop at the architect, but, we'll get to site and we'll find that intersections won't work because the detail that's been designed simply can't fit together. So we then have to use our specialist designers to redesign it, send it back, get it approved, and then make it work so that there's an immediate delay. We're talking about quality of labour, Ange, but how much of that actually sits, with the operatives, or is it to do with people higher up the chain?
I think it's a fair point. I think it's something that is worth considering, because it's often, I often think about our clients are largely main contractors. And I often think about that world, and you look at the size of some of these businesses, even like tier twos, sort of the regional contractors. And then you obviously look at tier ones, you've got regional offices around the country. And you look at the size and scale and the number of people they're employing to deliver what they're delivering. And I often think it's out of kilter. I often think to myself, does a £150 million turnover regional contractor really need to be employing 600 people? And what are them 600 people doing to ensure that the sites that get delivered are the right things? So I think there's kind of something in that kind of, I think,
a guest. Let's get a guest, main contractor guest that we can prod and poke and kick on that subject.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of thought process, and how good are those people, and how well are they kind of trained? How well do they behave? I think a lot of what we see that filters down through to site is about behaviours. I think there is a huge issue between there's obviously this conflict. There's often this conflict, isn't there, between what really needs to happen and what actually happens, because there are these behaviours around, cost versus value, procurement and administration of contracts and the way jobs are won and whatever. And I just think, Yeah, I think there's something to be said for kind of shining a light on that. How good are the new site managers of the future, the kind of the people we're bringing through? How good are sort of the commercial people out there? Again, not dissimilar to the Labour conversation. I think we've got some really good people in some really good businesses. Not sure there's enough of them.
Well, here's one. Here's a direct example I can give you. It's a facilities management company that I won't name, but we've done a couple of really interesting jobs for them, and our commercial team has dealt with the same QS on both of those rather big jobs. And throughout those jobs, that the commercial manager on the other side has not returned a single phone call that our people have made, and they have called him dozens of times, over various different issues. He will not speak on the phone. He will not acknowledge that he's missed a phone call. He simply will not do it. And in the end, it got so bad that we went to his boss, who did absolutely nothing about it. So everything is on email. So when we needed quick decisions on things, we could never get them because he wasn't prepared to talk on the telephone. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah, I think that's probably, that's a societal problem, isn't it? Like, I think you see that, we're beginning to see that everywhere in business. I don't think it's right at all. Trying to get people to speak to you is...
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard generally. But when you're dealing with money and decisions need to be quick, if you're in the job as a QS or a commercial manager, part of the skill of that role, the essential skill, is interacting and communicating with other people, whether that's on Teams, whether it's on WhatsApp, face-to-face, on the telephone. Construction works on the basis of good communication, right?
Yeah.
It just can't work if people don't talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, we experience this all the time. And it's ironic, isn't it, going back to some of the conversations we've just had around what the contract requires us to do in terms of, say, administering variations and stuff like that. You need to get agreement on a variation. How do you get agreement on an email if there's some negotiations to be had? And how do you get it within the timeframes you need to have it? So no wonder we all sit around waiting for decisions to be made when we're playing email tennis. And meanwhile, the lads are sort of sat there on site. So I suppose that comes back to, how good is that middle piece? How good are, what some people might term the clipboards versus, the tradies, the trades on site?
What we see is we don't see drivers, I think is an apt term to use. We see people who won't make a decision, who will either try to kick it up the chain or kick it into the long grass, when actually to get the whole thing moving or to keep it rocking and rolling, you have to have a driver on each side, the people that you're dealing with. You can't just be passive in construction. If there's an issue, the issue needs to be addressed and dealt with. It can't just be, we'll get to that, buried in an email for 3 weeks. Because if it's left like that, the program's going to fail.
Yeah, I think there's probably inherent problems within these larger businesses. I think sort of feels to me like systems, processes, responsibilities, accountabilities, all of that breaks down. The more people you have, I think that gets lost.
That's also, I think, due to lack of technology being used appropriately in construction. Construction lagging so far behind in terms of having adequate processes which are then digitized into ways which people can very easily follow, rather than just doing their own thing because they fancy it, or Fred's always done it like that for 30 years kind of thing,
Yeah, and it is sort of facilitating that communication piece. But again, some of this comes back full circle, I think, to this is the type of stuff that we're not even teaching in schools, are we? So, I think there's like the wider piece to this. But I think, pulling it back, I think we've got, we've got quality issues probably at every level within construction. And again, we seem to want to try and do more and more and more with the labour pool, whether it's sort of the labour on site or there is this middle management piece. I think what we've got to get our heads around is it is more about productivity and efficiency and, so technology and methods of building. And there's all sorts of things that you can touch upon that would make all of this a lot better. But I don't think it's just down to, picking up with the lads on site. So I think there is something in that whole kind of middle management piece, because the other bit to this is then, as a specialist, you get pulled into that. So you end up inflating your own teams because before you know it, you end up mirroring the structure of the people that you're working with because they've taken you down a route. So, I can see how very quickly and very easily, You know, we as a business, you know, you outsource some of it for as long as you can, but at what point do you need your own internal, you know, health and safety manager? At what point do you need your own internal kind of full commercial structure? And, you know, you might have started out with one QS, and before you know it, you know, you've got this kind of full structure. Where does even things like social value sit? You know, like you get to a point where,
don't get me started.
Well,
on social
maybe that's a different
value.
that's a different topic. You know, we are construction and we are supposed to
Let's do that on another
all the
one,
world's ills.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there's definitely a conversation there. But before you know it, you've got main contractors with social value managers who are pecking your head about this, that, and the other on a contract. And it's like, well, where's that information coming from? Where's it sitting? It almost becomes a job for somebody or part of somebody's job. And I think we end up mirroring some of that, and then how good are we at it? So I think it's a fair point. I think it's one we need to look in the mirror and go, you know what? Yeah, I think it could be better.
That also goes though into things like PQQ. I know Build UK has done a lot of good work in terms of common assessment standard, but still, when you look at the different tiers of main contractor, they don't all accept common assessment standard. They will still say you need to have X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G accreditation. Well, hold on a minute. What's that giving you? How does that help us deliver? We're ticking boxes, but surely, particularly now under the Building Safety Act, should be about competency levels, right? Not about if you can tick a box that says you've got an awareness of ISO 54027.
Well, again, that makes me worry. If you can't even get a QS to pick up a phone, yeah. How are we going to make sure that people are competent with fire and all of that? Again, I think that's one for another day.
Yeah, it is. But it's a big one.
It takes you right into, you know, a different conversation. But, you know, competency is an interesting conversation, and maybe we've not got enough competent people. So here's one for you, Mike. Knowing what you know about construction as you sit here today, would you encourage a family member, a younger family member, you know, a son, daughter, niece, nephew, would you, as you sit here now, would you encourage them into construction, or would you actively discourage them from entering construction as a career?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would really actively encourage them into the industry, definitely. But you're smiling there, you're going to laugh. But it would have to be, it would be on the basis of the experience that I have to make sure that they were on the correct path, actually. And what do I mean by that? Where they end up with the right company. They end up, if they're going to do an apprenticeship, fantastic. There are so many amazing opportunities there with lots of fantastic firms, but it has to be where they are being looked after appropriately, not just being used as cheap labor on site because that, you know, someone needs to move a load of pallets of something and get the apprentice to do it because he or she need to learn somehow. No, absolute nonsense. The point of someone doing an apprenticeship is that they learn. And all these awful behaviours that culturally remain on site, well, I had to do that, so he has to do it. No, ridiculous. The point is about learning. And yeah, they have to learn about life at the same time. But given the framework of construction where we are today, if they're not with the right firm, they could end up being really badly damaged from that. So if it was a random person joining randomly, my answer may well be different. But if it's a family member of mine and I can assist them and give them some pointers as to what to look for and what not to do, yeah, absolutely. It is an amazing industry with lots of fantastic people, and lots of amazing things are going to come down the line, particularly tech-wise. That's something that's often ignored. And again, we as an industry are really guilty about not stressing that. We're too busy delivering projects, not talking about how to make life easier. That's a whole different subject. But the generations that are coming after us, they were born into technology, whereas we weren't. You know, we've had to learn that stuff as it's come along. And, you know, my first computer was a ZX81, you know, in the 80s or whenever that was. You know, now people have got computers in their pockets. So I think there are fabulous opportunities for young people. And yeah, I wouldn't hesitate.
You see, it's interesting because I have got a slightly different view on this, and I come at this from a couple of different angles. So with my hat on as owning and running a family business, you know, we're second generation. I have got teenage kids. And as I sit here now, I think from the family point of view and the family business point of view, and I think this is quite a common situation to be in construction, I I am not actively encouraging them. I'm not necessarily discouraging them, but I'm not actively encouraging them into the industry, because I think the weight of that expectation of a family business, it's quite a lot, and it's almost too much to kind of put on. I won't want to be putting that on. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm coming at this from two ways. So, you know, my kids know what I do. They've not really engaged with it that much. They're not that interested. You know, they're not really that bothered, you know.
That's
and
boring, Mum.
they're off pursuing kind of what they want to do and what interests them. And I think that's really important. Now, some of that might come back full circle and end up touching construction. But it might not. So with that hat on, you know, I'm not actively encouraging them. And if I'm really honest, I've got a son and a daughter. Right now, would I still want my daughter in particular to be entering kind of this industry in this world? I still think we've got a long way to go, and I'm not sure.
Hold on. Why are you making the distinction between son and daughter? Why not both of them? What's the difference here?
Because it's a world full of men, run by men in grey suits. And it is a very male-dominated industry.
But when you say that, are we talking about like some sort of toxic masculinity thing here, or threat? Or
I think it's attitudes and behaviours. I think it's just, you know, I manage it, but I'm quite headstrong and quite strong. But, you know, I still just don't think that. Yeah, I think it is. It is behaviours. It's, you know.
But when you say behaviours, do you mean poor behaviour towards women specifically? What do you mean? Just expand on that.
What do I mean? I mean, I see lots about it in this space about. We're going off on a bit of a tangent, aren't we? But I suppose it ties into what I've said. But you know,
because it's teenage girls and construction. Girls, yeah.
You know, so in my world, you know, specialist contractor, you're delivering projects. You know, what this is all about is it's driven by sites. You live or die by what you deliver on site, you know, and the group of people that you assemble, because it's about people, not necessarily the building. And I can control, and I'd be happy for it to be within our culture and our world, but I wouldn't want it to have that kind of pressure of like the family piece, but then put her out there into some of the behaviours you see from bullying main contractors, like bullying QSs. If you know, there is that stuff goes on.
Stress and pressure.
Yeah, and I do think there is an underlying sort of respect issue from some quarters. I do still think there is this attitude that women are less than men. That women, it's not from everybody, but it just feels like there is this undercurrent that, yeah. I can't really put my finger on it, but, you know, I wouldn't actively encourage you to do that. And then, yeah, take the point. You know, it's no different for my son. You know, you've got to be aware when you're coming into this industry that you've still got that going on, whether you're male or female. But being a female, I think it amplifies it and you see it a bit more. And I also think, you know, one of my big bugbears, it really does do my head in, the whole kind of going on site and I need a wee and the toilet's locked. And the toilet's locked because generally the blokes on site do not respect that space and will make it as filthy and disgusting as their own toilets. And that does my head in. And then I think the other piece, though, in terms of then the kind of more generalist approach is there's 160 plus different roles you can undertake in construction. From my point of view, we end up viewing things in quite a narrow way with what we do in our business. So if young people were coming into our business, you'd be talking about the trades on site. You might be talking about something that's related to kind of design or pre-con and pricing work and getting work ready to get to site. Or you might be talking about like a QS type role, you know, the sort of the accountants of the construction industry, but it's fairly narrow. But you go back up the chain and you look at all of those different bits that fit within construction, you know, and the opportunities abound. And I think it is often overlooked. I don't think schools understand what we do. So I don't think parents understand what we do. So therefore, kids certainly don't understand what we do. So if we can't get that messaging right and get that out there so that the schools and the parents and therefore the kids know what goes on in construction, we will have an attraction problem. I think we will have that.
Let's just go back a bit, though, if we can, because some of those things, particularly about women, are you saying the industry's essentially toxic for women?
I think where you're in a more professional environment, where you're further up the chain, probably less so. So again, I'm sort of thinking about architects, engineers, planning consultants, PQSs. I think that's a nice consultant, white collar, for want of a better way of putting it. I think it's a fairly safe place to be. And I think you're probably all right there. But I think on some construction sites, yeah, I do. I think there are some places that even I don't want to be.